Well, good afternoon to you. 506 here at News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news, and we've always got so much of it. Kash Patel is going to be with us at 5:30. Former Trump administration official. He'll react to Congress's decision to extend those abusive surveillance powers the feds have been using against you, only hundreds of thousands of times. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630 WMAL. WRIC headline today: Virginia Supreme Court reinstates lawsuit from former teacher who refused to use students' pronouns. It's a little more involved than just refusing to use pronouns. We all use pronouns. It's specifically about making up pronouns and trying to compel a teacher to use the fake pronouns. Peter Vlaming wasn't playing along. And in fact, we've been talking about this case now for a long time. We keep every so often we get an update. Today's one of those days, and it's a good one. Joining us now is Chris Schandevel. He's a senior counsel for Alliance Defending Freedom's Appellate Advocacy team, and he's on the phone. Hello, Chris.
Hey, Vince. It's a privilege to be with you here today on this really historic day in Virginia.
It's a big one for you and for Peter Vlaming and for liberty. Tell us, what did the Virginia Supreme Court decide today?
So, in what's really a landmark ruling for free speech and religious freedom here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the court held, as we had argued, that the government is not allowed to force any of us to endorse the government's viewpoint on controversial issues like gender identity as a condition for keeping their jobs. That is wrong. It violates the Virginia Constitution, and the Supreme Court made that very clear in its ruling today.
Yeah, so in Vlaming's case, Peter Vlaming was a high school French teacher, and as I understand it, a student came to him and started demanding that he use invented pronouns. And as a compromise, he said, "Oh, well, I'm not going to use invented pronouns, but I'll refer to your name." So he used the student's preferred name, but didn't use pronouns, and for that he was fired?
That's absolutely right. This is a student who Peter had in class before. It's a student that he loved, that he cared for, that he thought very highly of. And so when the student came to Peter and said, "Listen, I want to start using a new name and new pronouns that are, inconsistent with my biological sex," Peter went out of his way to try to accommodate this student. Like you said, he said, "I'm happy to use your new name. In fact, I'm going to let all of my students in class choose a new French name for the semester. So we're not singling out this one student, to make the student as comfortable and accommodated as possible. And Peter said, I'll even avoid using pronouns altogether to avoid making the student feel singled out or uncomfortable." But what he couldn't do was use biologically incorrect pronouns, because to Peter, that would have been endorsing a viewpoint that he did not believe. And for that simple, silent protest, just avoiding pronouns altogether, the school fired him.
I just want to admit, I know this is not at the center of the legal argument here, but, making concessions like that, where you're like, "Oh, I won't use pronouns, I'm just going to use names, and I'll try and make you feel better." It turns out it never works, does it? It just becomes like a big permission slip for this Chinese cultural revolution we have playing out in America. It's not enough until you are singing from the same sheet of music. Otherwise, you're going to have your life destroyed.
When the government is set on, not caring about teachers, not caring about students, not caring about its citizens, just enforcing this ideological litmus test, you're right. At the end of the day, none of that matters, because all the government cares about is forcing everyone to agree with and publicly affirm their controversial viewpoint. And that's just not permissible under our Constitution.
So the Supreme Court today says, well, actually, no, the lawsuit can continue. Do I have that right? So is there still an active court case involved here?
That's correct. So based on the ruling today, what the Virginia Supreme Court held is that if everything that we allege in our complaint about what happened to Peter is true, and it absolutely is, we have the evidence to back that up, he was fired not for something that he said, but simply for something he couldn't say. Yeah. And what the Virginia Supreme Court said today is, if that's true, then his constitutional rights were violated. So the case gets remanded back to the trial court, basically for the production of evidence to support our case. And we're very confident, based on the ruling today, that we'll be able to put on that evidence and that we'll be able to achieve a complete victory for Peter in the trial court.
One, in the majority opinion, Justice D. Arthur Kelsey wrote today, quote, absent a truly compelling reason for doing so, no government committed to these principles can lawfully coerce its citizens into pledging verbal allegiance to ideological views that violate their sincerely held religious beliefs. That's a pretty clear statement from the justice there.
Oh, it absolutely is. And in fact, that's probably my favorite statement in the entire opinion. I have it pulled it up on my laptop right now. And what Justice Kelsey writes for a majority of the court right before that is that the essential character of our constitutional system is that it is to protect diversity of thought, diversity of speech, diversity of religion, and diversity of opinions. So when the Constitution protects freedom of thought and freedom of conscience, really everyone wins, no matter where you come down on any specific issue. When conscience is protected, everyone wins. So today's victory was a victory not just for Peter and not just for people who agree with Peter, but for all Virginians across the Commonwealth.
And it's amazing too. The school board it has been arguing that that Vlaming's speech was discriminatory, that he was discriminating against the student by using the student's invented name but not their invented pronouns.
Right. Their argument is basically because Peter works for the school, because he works for the government, that simple government job transforms him into a mouthpiece for the government, even on the most controversial issues of today, and that they can force him to say whatever they want him to say, including, for example, if the shoe were on the other foot and this were a more conservative school district, telling teachers, you're forced to use biologically correct pronouns, even if that violates your conscience, if it violates your religious beliefs. The school board's position is a school can force and the government can force an employee to say whatever it wants them to say. And our position is no matter which side of the issue you come down on, that's just not true under our Constitution. And the Virginia Supreme Court affirmed that view today.
Do you see a sea change on this issue? Are things changing? It did feel like we were moving really aggressively, and still does feel like we're moving very aggressively in the direction of compelled speech and kind of enforced by the government. Is there a course correction in play now?
We absolutely think that there is, and we see the course correction playing out in our courts. So the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals in a case involving a college professor a couple of years back reached the same conclusion as the Virginia Supreme Court reached today, that no one can be forced to endorse the government's viewpoint on an issue like gender identity simply as a condition for keeping their job. It's really been overzealous government officials in the executive and legislative branches that are trying to get that result. And the courts have started to say, no, that's just not permissible under our Constitution. And we think as more courts hear these cases, we're going to see courts throughout the country really endorsing that bedrock principle of constitutional law, that you simply can't be forced to mouth or endorse the government's viewpoint on a controversial issue of public debate.
Have you talked to Peter Vlaming at all today? How does he feel about all of this?
Yeah, we've been emailing with him back and forth. He's over in France. So as a result of this decision, it effectively ended his teaching career here in the States, and he ended up moving his family across the ocean over to France. And trying to find a country that'd be more accommodating to his views. Well, perhaps not, given France's history, but he has some family history there, and that's really where he fell in love with the French language, which is what he was teaching here in the States. He is overjoyed and thrilled about the ruling today, for himself and his family, but not just that. Again, for citizens across the Commonwealth of Virginia whose rights to religious freedom and right to freedom of speech and freedom of thought will receive more robust protection going forward after this decision. He was fired in 2018? 2018, so it's been 5 years.
Oh my gosh. So this is a meaningful, 5 years is a long time for anything. That's a meaningful chunk of his life that he's sort of defined by this in a lot of ways. He'll be remembered for his role in fighting for liberty in this way. But it's a big deal. It's a big deal to say yes to this. A lot of people, I think, would just put it behind them and say, hey, look, I don't want to be seen as a hassle. I just want to move on with my life. I want to do something else. But he stayed in this fight. That's a big deal, isn't it?
It's a huge deal. So the work that ADF does, protecting liberty, religious freedom, free speech, the right to life, mean, we wouldn't be able to do any of this if it weren't for courageous clients like Peter Blaming, who take a stand for truth. And not only do they take a stand in their communities and in their government jobs, in Peter's case, but they're willing to go into a courtroom and allow us to tell their stories and allow us to advocate for their rights, often having, abuse and threats and insults thrown their way. And they say, you know what, I know what I believe. I know what I stand for. I'm going to take that stand, not just for myself, but also for my family, for my community, for my neighbors, and for generations that will come after me. So we're so proud to stand alongside Peter, and we're just so thrilled to be able to achieve this victory for him and for generations to come.
It's a big deal. And lastly, Chris Schandevel with Alliance Defending Freedom. Have you detected, has there been a rise in people approaching your organization who say, hey, I have a situation that's very much like Peter's that I'd like to tell you about?
Oh, we absolutely have. We're getting calls regularly from teachers and other school employees across the country that are facing these exact same issues, where you have overzealous school boards and just really intent on enforcing their ideological viewpoint on this specific issue of gender identity. And what teachers are saying is, listen, we care for our kids, and caring for our kids means we cannot tell them a lie. I cannot speak something to them that I believe to be untrue, because that would do a disservice to the kids that I love and I serve and I care about. And these school officials don't care. They're forcing them to adopt the school's viewpoint and to publicly endorse it. And so we are thrilled for the result today, not only for what it means for Peter and not only for what it means here in Virginia, but because we think it does reflect that broader sea change that we're going to start seeing across the country as courts adopt the same positions and accept the arguments that we made in Peter's case. And so we're very hopeful and optimistic that more rights of individual Americans who insist on standing for conscience and standing for freedom will be reaffirmed going forward after this decision.
A great gift for Christmas. It's so nice. Chris Schandevel, Senior Counsel over at Alliance Defending Freedom's Appellate Advocacy Team. Excellent work, sir, and thank you very much for sharing the good news today. There are a lot of freaks out there. You know about that? There are a lot. They're everywhere. They're after your kids. There's a guy called Jeffrey Marsh. You ever heard of this person? He's on TikTok. Yeah, well, your kids may have if they're on TikTok. He's a Buddhist life coach who calls himself non-binary. And do you know what he does with his TikTok account? You may not be surprised to find out, given that he's a Buddhist life coach who calls himself non-binary. He's encouraging your children to go no contact with you. No contact. Stop communicating with your parents. Additionally, he has a Patreon where he encourages children to sign up for $4 a month to discuss their sexuality with him. This is explicitly grooming. What else would this be? This is grooming. Libs of TikTok has a video, another one from this guy. He's got makeup on. You'll not be surprised to hear. In a 5 o'clock shadow. And he says this. He discusses how to go no contact with your family. He says it'll be tough at first, but eventually that's where you find happiness. To stop communicating with your own family and to pay me $4 a month to discuss your sexuality.
Going no contact will feel worse. Can't lie to you. Because right where you are now, if you go no contact with a family member, you'll feel worse. Right where you are now, where the relationship is now, is in equilibrium.
And just remember, the Chinese government's endorsing this. Everything you're hearing is being just pumped into your kid's cell phone, courtesy of the Chinese government.
They get to do whatever the heck they want, and you deal with it. That's not pleasant, but that is a deal. That is a pact, and both of you understand the rules. If you go no contact, the rules change. You're unmoored. There's no sense of safety and sense of place because the rules change. You change them, but the rules and the dynamic changes. And what,
by the way, most of this is just nonsensical. I don't even know what he's saying.
Comes in sometimes to flood that void is guilt. But eventually, the guilt subsides. You work through it. You're kind to yourself. And on the other side of the no contact guilt scenario is peace.
You hear this?
That has nothing to do with the deal you're in now with that person.
Happiness is destroying the relationships you have with your family. That's the message. How's that TikTok working out? How's that? It's not well. It's not going great, actually. We have an entire society that's been corrupted by this kind of thinking and these kind of people. Guys wearing makeup, telling your children not to communicate with you anymore. It'll be tough at first, but eventually it'll be great. It'll be really great. And I'll still be here, and you'll be paying me $4 a month, and we can talk sex together. It's crazy. Meanwhile, speaking of crazy, right here in Fairfax County, Virginia, last night, our friend Nikki Neely posted this in Fairfax County School Board member Carl Frisch was sworn in on a stack of LGBTQ-themed books. You know how most people put their hand on the Bible or some other holy text in order to take the oath of office? He put his hand on a stack of pornography. One of the books depicts naked teenage boys, so naked child porn for you. And Nikki points out, don't forget the book ban narrative is a part of a dishonest political campaign aimed at attacking parents. Families wanting age-appropriate material in their children's schools is not book banning. It's common sense. But here's Carl Frisch being sworn in on a stack of some of it, I guess, was kiddie porn.
Repeat after me, please. Yes. I state your name.
I, Carl V. Frisch,
Do solemnly swear
that
I will support the Constitution of the United States
I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia
and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia
and the well-being of children. I'm going to skip that part. What is going on? Look, it honestly is crazy. It's totally crazy. Well, that was happening in Fairfax last night. Carl Frisch sworn in on a stack of gay pornographic books. That'll help the kids. It's going to be a big deal. It's definitely the math, reading, writing that they need. I don't know what else to say about this. Isn't it crazy? Words escape me. Coming up, we're going to be joined by Kash Patel. He reacts to Congress's decision, both Republican and Democrat, to continue spying on American citizens without a warrant. It's out of control. Kash reacts. Hey, good afternoon to you. 5:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. The United States Congress today tried to pull a fast one. They may very well succeed. Both the Senate and the House, with Republican and Democrat support, have passed an extension of warrantless surveillance of American citizens. Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which has been abused routinely through the years, hundreds of thousands of times. It gets another extension for a couple of months now, as all a part of a nearly $1 trillion defense spending package that was just pushed through both houses of Congress in the last 24 hours. For more on this, I want to bring in someone who's been watching it all very closely and knows a lot about how the government abuses its power to hurt you. Kash Patel is here. He's a former deputy assistant to President Trump, former chief of staff at the Department of Defense, and the author of Government Gangsters. Kash, good to have you back with us, sir.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on the show.
Give us a sense of how big of a deal this is that Congress just reauthorized this surveillance program.
It's absolutely enormous. Look, I'm on all sides of this thing. I was with Devin Nunes leading the Russiagate investigation where we exposed the FISA court abuse to unlawfully surveil American citizens, to wit, President Trump. And now all of that has come to light, and Devin and I spent 5 years putting up fixes and recommendations. But since this FISA clause was sunsetting on December 31st, the first Congress waited till the last minute and tried to jam in our recommendations, and no one could agree on anything, just like everything else is dysfunctional in Washington.
Yeah.
But here's the problem. And I'm on the chief of staff at DOD. I want DOD fully funded all the time. These two things don't have to go together, but they jammed them together because these swamp monsters know they can curry the votes. And here's what they did. Chris Wray last year alone got caught using this program illegally 274,000 times to domestically surveil American citizens, probably mostly America First citizens. And he just got a reauthorization to do it again for another year into another election cycle because these guys in Congress couldn't get their act together.
And this is something we've known all year was coming. I mean, this is the kind of thing I remember saying at the beginning of the year. It's coming in December. These guys should not reauthorize it. Yeah. This is your chance to get rid of it. We've been saying it all year, and they waited until this very moment to try and shove it through and hope that we're all distracted by Christmas.
Well, that's just it. This is how Washington and the swamp works, and this is why Americans hate it. Look, it's not Kash Patel saying Chris Wray and his FBI got caught doing it last year. The FISA court themselves issued a public opinion a year and a half ago or last year that said Chris Wray used it against 19,000 donors of a congressional candidate, 24,000 groups related to January 6th. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act was used domestically against Americans illegally, and we had a chance to fix it. I'm the one that's arguing that we need to keep 702 with huge, huge reforms, and these guys just gave him a reward for violating America's constitutional rights because Congress couldn't act soon enough and didn't listen to Devin Nunes, Johnny Ratcliffe, and Rick Grinnell, and others along the way who said, here are the reforms we need. Mike Lee and Rand Paul were championing a right bill.
Heroes.
But we couldn't get it. We need more than two.
We need more than two. So why did somebody like Ted Cruz vote to extend this?
Look, I'm not sure. And here's the thing. Politically, I'm not the political, genius. But I think what happens is you get put in a position in the newspapers where you're like, oh, if you vote no, you voted not to fund our Department of Defense. It's lunacy. You can do both things separately, but they combine them together because these guys are government gangsters, and all they care about is winning their next reelection cycle and not getting written up with a nasty gram from the New York Times.
So, but help me understand this. Why would I know you kind of mentioned it at the outset that everything gets crammed in here, but this is not a Pentagon spending thing. This is the FBI that's abusing this particular thing. So how could you even include a FISA extension in a Pentagon funding bill?
Exactly. Look, you're nailing it right on the head, and people are getting an important civics lesson. If Congress did its job for the last 2 years when we were saying, and look, guys like me and Johnny Ratcliffe and Devin Nunes and Rick Grinnell have been out there for the last year plus telling them how to fix this, telling Congress to get together, have a write-up, have a rules meeting, put it on the floor. But no, they don't want to do that. They want to wait till the last minute and have their other 3-week vacations here and there, and this is the consequence. You reward illegal activity from government officials who will never be held accountable, and they get to use it going forward to rig another presidential election, and we won't hear about it for another 2 years after the abuses occur.
Well, speaking of rigging the presidential election, I want to move into a different topic with you, which is the Justice Department is still trying to meddle in the election right now. And Special Counsel Jack Smith is desperate to have a highly publicized trial of the former president of the United States and the current frontrunner for the office, Donald Trump. The Supreme Court got in the way of that yesterday because they said they would consider, actually this whole week, they're considering a couple things. One is presidential immunity and whether or not Trump is even entitled to be charged for these supposed crimes. And two, the fact that obstructing a congressional proceeding is not what the January 6 people did, and it is not what Donald Trump actually did. The court may decide that, hey, these charges don't even apply, and thus, right now, the trial dates all seem to be on hold. Give us your general sense of what the news means this week for the Justice Department's attempts at election meddling.
Well, it looks like, and I sure hope this is what happens, it's an end to the lawfare, end to the weaponization of justice and a two-tier system of justice. Look, as a former national security prosecutor who investigated all types of crimes all over the world, you want the Constitution to reign supreme. Yeah. And Jack Smith and the judges in D.C. wanted it to be a weapon to kneecap Donald Trump. Of course, there is presidential executive privilege here. And of course, there's another case, outstanding issues to include, can individuals even be charged with obstruction of a congressional proceeding as it relates to January 6th, when the statute they used was a financial crime statute from Sarbanes-Oxley? These two things are both getting heard by the Supreme Court, one on a fast track, one not on a fast track. And so how can these judges say we want to get a conviction before we have an answer on the law from the Constitution and the Supreme Court? It's political, and they know they are going to get nuked at the end of the day because President Trump did nothing wrong, but they just want the headline that says, oh, we were able to convict him before the election.
What do you make of the current composition of the Supreme Court? What is the likeliness that they come down on the side of the Constitution, in your view?
Well, the sad thing is, the Supreme Court is supposed to be 9 individuals who just come down on the side of the Constitution and the law. And what's happened is our entire system of justice has been weaponized. I mean, let's remind the audience about the Roe v. Wade decision that was leaked illegally prematurely and in part just to shift the political narrative at the United States Supreme Court. So I would just hope these justices would listen to the law, and if they did that, no presidential privilege immunity has ever been initiated in our entire history because the Constitution prohibits it. So how are they going to go ahead and do it so for Donald Trump? Probably because there's a few justices up there that don't want him to be president. But that's just my guess.
Now, if I've learned anything about the left, though, and you know this better than most, that even if they experience a setback, they're not going to allow them that ultimately to stop them in their ambitions. I mean, the idea that the Supreme Court is going to basically stop some of the more obvious ways the Justice Department is election meddling is good. But do you worry about the ravenous appetite of the left and what they would do without having Jack Smith meddling in the election with a trial?
Well, the thing about the radical left is these are the guys that hijacked previous elections with Russiagate, the 51 Intel letter, misinformation about January 6th, impeachment 1, and so on. They always have a backup plan. So they already have a backup to the backup in terms of the Supreme Court. And what they're going to try to do is get some of these state-level judges that have charged Donald Trump with crimes to have him taken off the campaign trail and sit in a courtroom for 60, 90, and 120 days next year during the heart of a presidential cycle. If they can't kneecap him with a conviction, they will try to sideline him by putting him in a seat in the courtroom. And I don't think America is going to tolerate it. Look what happened in the New York case. It's completely backfired. And America has seen, irrespective of politics, how the system of justice has been weaponized.
Well, the other piece is that they're also trying to bankrupt his political campaign by doing that. So not only are they keeping him off the campaign trail, they're draining his campaign coffers because he has to pay legal bills in order to fight back against attacks that are explicitly designed to debilitate his campaign. I've heard, like, I think maybe Chris Christie has said stuff like this. Oh, what? We don't want to waste campaign dollars on legal bills. This is by design. The left is doing this explicitly to drain Trump's war chest, because they're by any means necessary trying to stop him from becoming president again.
That's absolutely what they're trying to do, but I think this is another scenario which is backfiring. Americans are seeing what's happening to Donald Trump, and they are pouring money into Trump's campaign coffers, and not the rich folks. Everyday Americans. Donald Trump, I was just with him in New York at the gala, and he announced that the average donation to his campaign was $61, and it has been skyrocketing ever since these lawfare heathens came out to the courts of law to try to kneecap Donald Trump. That shows me that Americans are responding to Donald Trump and not the radical left's agenda to keep him off the ballot and out of office. And I think we're going to see that surge continue through Iowa, and I think we're going to have to keep the foot on the gas pedal like only President Trump can throughout the rest of the year, and we're going to have to keep raising money for him.
Now, on the other side of the aisle, you have Joe Biden and his family, and the fact that it's quite obvious that they've been very corruptly generating revenue for themselves through the years. Biden continues to lie about this. As recently as last week, he said it was a lie that he had any relationship whatsoever with any of the family's business partners, which, of course, is a brazen lie itself. Yesterday, Hunter Biden refused a congressional subpoena. He showed up at Congress, actually, to give a brazen speech about how he was refusing to honor a congressional subpoena. The White House said that he had consulted with his father ahead of that decision. Is it your view that it sounds to me, Kash Patel, like President Biden was not only aware, but perhaps even encouraged his son to break the law yesterday? Is that the kind of thing that might be an impeachable offense?
Well, yeah. Look, the guy can be impeached for so many things, but what I want Congress to focus on is getting the documents and start prosecuting people like Hunter Biden who intentionally spike the football in their end zone and say, I'm breaking the law, I'm violating a congressional subpoena. Let's not forget what the Unselect January 6th committee did to Peter Navarro and Stephen Bannon for violating a congressional subpoena. Where is this Republican majority going with this contempt of Congress proceeding? That's what I care about, the rule of law and the flagrant disregard by Hunter Biden, because the folks in Hollywood that he has bankrolling him for the last 10 years can pay for all of his bills, and he can call daddy in the White House for a get-out-of-jail-free card. Well, Congress is a separate branch of government, and they need to put their big boy pants on and prosecute the case against Hunter Biden for violating a congressional subpoena, which is a felony.
Yes, and make that referral to the Justice Department. Now, I think a lot of our listeners are aware of the fact that means Merrick Garland takes over if they get a referral here.
So that's one of the ways they do it. There is actually an inherent contempt of Congress clause. It is a power that the United States Congress has just for this type of scenario where the sergeant at arms can go out and arrest anyone who violates a congressional subpoena, and they can have their own trial within the chamber. But you got to have a Congress that has a backbone to execute that effect.
That would take a majority vote from the House?
Simple majority, yeah.
Okay. Well, Republicans currently hold the majority. We'll see if they can actually get those votes together. Yeah, slim one, thanks to everybody quitting. What's that all about? George Santos, they booted him. Kevin McCarthy's quit. I mean, it's like so crazy. You really think you have that much runway to like get rid of all these people? Lastly, I want to ask you, because you're familiar with the House, having worked there, and with Devin Nunes, and this decision this week by the Republicans to, quote, formalize the impeachment inquiry into Biden. I've been telling the audience that, well, look, it's already been happening. Ever since September, they've been doing this impeachment inquiry. This week is just a vote. I mean, it's like kind of just, is it substantively different? Are there meaningful powers that these guys just obtained by having this vote? Or is this meant to kind of be some red meat for the base to distract us?
It's the latter, I think, in my opinion. It gives them a little more authority, but look, it gives them a couple of headlines saying, oh, we're going to impeach Joe Biden. Hey, you could have announced this a year ago. You have the subpoenas, you have the documents, put those out for the American public. And, oh, by the way, Chris Wray and Merrick Garland have violated 6 congressional subpoenas on their own involving the Biden crime family syndicate investigation by refusing to turn over documents and redacting them from Congress and the American people. But you know what they are getting? A reward. They're getting 702, clean authorization. You break the law, government gangsters.
Yeah.
We will reward you in Congress for doing that instead of holding anyone accountable. Impeaching Joe Biden's a piñata. What I care about is getting the documents so the American people can adjudicate the decisions at the polls. And when they see those documents, they will resoundingly vote for Donald J. Trump, in my opinion. So
you're totally right. And it's not a mistake. It's not a mistake that they voted to move the impeachment inquiry to the formal process on the same day that they passed $1 trillion defense bill that included an extension of FISA. It does seem like those two things happened for a reason.
Well, as I say in Government Gangsters, there are no coincidences in government. These guys engineer it all. I hope everybody picks up a copy for the holidays. It's a bestseller, and Donald Trump calls it the roadmap to destroying the deep state, which is what we must do now.
Well, now it's an even better seller. Government Gangsters is the book. Kash Patel's the author. Thank you, Kash. Always good to talk to you. Please have a Merry Christmas, sir.
Thanks, my friend. Merry Christmas.
If you were a CNN host and you wanted to embarrass Vivek Ramaswamy on television, don't you think you'd do like 5 minutes of homework before you started interviewing him? Vivek did a town hall in Des Moines, Iowa this week, and Abby Phillip is the name of the CNN hostess who chatted with him on stage, and she was debating him. I was supposed to be a town hall where everyone asks questions, and she's just standing on stage debating him, and she just had no idea what she's talking about. She asked him, hey, wait a second, you said January 6th was an inside job, and this is a masterclass in merely, doing the homework and then explaining it with a grin on your face. This is how Vivek handled her.
Because I want to make sure that you understand what I'm asking.
I understand this deeply. And I told you, I was with you 3 years ago. I'm not there now.
Where is the evidence?
Yes.
Where is the evidence that the government had a plot, an inside job?
But no, I'm going to tell you what an inside job is, because I'm not
violence on January 6th.
I'm not going to let you put words in my mouth. I'm going to put my words in my mouth. And I'm going to tell you what I mean by that.
Where is the evidence that the government was involved in planning or executing January 6th?
So I'm going to give you hard facts. And if I may, Abby, I know this is going to be a little uncomfortable, but we're going to go through this, and you can push back on it after that. And you can push back on that. And let's do this fairly. Why did they suppress footage of now what's been released, 200 hours of footage of shooting rubber bullets into that crowd, shooting tear gas into that crowd? You didn't see that before. You saw what the response was to that. Now you see footage coming out of actually rolling out the red carpet for Capitol Police allowing people in,
again,
right through the front door.
The vast majority of the footage
evidence should have been released before, Abby.
Mr. Ramaswamy, the vast majority of the footage shows police officers being overrun
and I want to talk about one more
by
case.
violent
this is really important.
riders. That's
I'm going to give you some hard facts.
Of it shows.
So here's what entrapment is.
Cherry pick.
I'm not cherry picking. If I may finish, Abby. If I may finish, Abby. I'm not cherry picking.
Examples.
To the contrary. To the contrary, you know who cherry picked? You know who cherry picked? The government.
That is what happened.
The government cherry picked 12 hours of footage when there was 200 hours of footage. So cherry picking was the government, not me. Release the whole thing. And let me just finish one thing too, because this is super important as a topic.
So I
think this is a civil libertarian issue of our time. Gretchen Whitmer's kidnapping. I want to be really
there he goes,
because it's the same issue in the same FBI, same even part of the FBI. 3 people who were in an alleged plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer were acquitted at the end of trial because it was entrapment. That is, government agents put them up to do something they otherwise wouldn't have done. They gave them credit cards with spending limits of up to $5,000, encouraged them to buy munitions, plan something they weren't otherwise willing to plan. So much so, and I want people at home to know this, especially CNN viewers to know this, is that one of the jurors went to those defendants and apologized.
Yeah, Vivek Ramaswamy letting all 7 of CNN's viewers know something they had never heard before. The great one, Mark Levin, up next.